It is a fact that any BTRFS file system, even the simple volume that we have created, is a logical volume, and as such we can easily expand that volume across multiple disks. All I need to do to expand my volume is to go through and add a new device through to my existing volume. So the existing volume has been mounted to /data/BTRFS, and I can now just add the second disk. No partitioning, no anything else, no resizing the file system, and it's all going to be completed with this single command. We can go through and see the information, and the information will be by default spread across both disks. So the metadata about what makes up the volume will be stored both on SDC and SDD. So looking then at the FI show for SDC and SDD, they should show the same information. One of the reasons for perhaps expanding the volume is that we're perhaps running out of space on the original SDC disk and we want to expand onto a second disk. So we could then go through and balance the data and metadata across both drives. The metadata, remember, we saw was about 130 meg before, so now spreading this, balancing it across both disks, we should see that it is used more evenly across both disks. The -M option is for the metadata, and the -D option is for the physical data itself. Now when we go through and say look at SDC, we should see at least that the data and metadata is a little bit more balanced. In the same way, when we look at our disk-free utilization, it's not going to be so bad where we're just expanding the volume across multiple disks. But when we start using RAID devices, then just because we've got 3 1 gigabyte drives within our volume doesn't mean we have 3 gigabytes of disk space. So the output that we might get from df-h, our normal utility, may not be sufficient to show us the available disk space. We really should look at BTRFS file system and then DF, and we can go through and specify the volume that we want to look at. So let's then move out to understand from the command line how we can set up multi-disk volumes. So of course then we're back on the command line of our CentOS 7 machine, and we're going to look at how easy it is to expand our BTRFS file system. So if we take a look at the way that it's set up currently, so if we do our BTRFS and then file system show for our existing device /dev/SDC, we can see then that we've just got 1 gig of space in use. Sure, part of that is used, 138 meg is used, and that's going to be the metadata and system data that makes up our volume. And even though we think we've only created a simple volume, this is actually a logical volume, and it's the fact that everything is a logical volume in BTRFS that makes this so simple to be able to expand. So if we were running out of disk space, it's a very simple matter of then just going through to BTRF device add, and then our extra drive that we've just added /dev/SDD, and we expand then the logical volume data-BTRFS. We just use the mount point, and that's all there is to it. We've expanded the volume and the file system in one go. We can use the standard tools for this because the disk space available is going to show correctly because we're not using RAID on our data. So now when we look at it, we can see then that we've got 2 gig available rather than the 1 gig drive that we had before. The metadata though is stored on both devices by default unless I specify to store the metadata on a single device. So we can see now that I've got 2 devices, and I could either look at SDD or SDC to show this information. If we were truly adding this device because we were running out of disk space, then we might want to balance the data and or metadata across both devices. Now the fact is really I don't have any data on the drive at the moment, but I do of course have the metadata. But we can choose to balance either or both of these across. Using the btrfs and balance subcommand, that then does a little bit like it says on the tin, balances our data. But if we go through and take a look at this, so we're going to do the data and the metadata, and we can specify then the volume that we want to work with. And of course it doesn't take long because there's not a huge amount of data here. Now when we go through and show from SDC, we can see now both devices are storing information. But again, we still need a better understanding of how this data is utilized. So if we go back into our btrfs command, and this time we're going to look at the disk free. So we use file system or FI and DF, pointing through to our volume. So data btrfs. When we look at the output, we can see the data itself is shown as single. So this doesn't mean it's a single device, but it's saying that it's just an expanded volume. There's no RAID protection or striping. Whereas even though we never specified the RAID array, the system and metadata is mirrored with RAID 1. So there's protection to the system and metadata. So in this way we can get a better idea of our disk usage space, and certainly if we were RAIDing our data itself, the disk free command that we might be useful is certainly going to give us inconsistent information, whereas at least this way we can see how much space is being used. So hopefully this gives you an idea of the simplicity of the management of the btrfs file system and how easy it is to expand your volumes. Let's jump back into the slides now so we can tidy up this section.